is Miami Total Football Radio. Inter Miami's chances of making the knockout stages of the MLS's back tournament took a big blow after a 2-1 loss to the Philadelphia Union. NYCFC is next, and a glimmer of hope, but it's all hanging by a thread. One topic, and I've already used three metaphors. I'm Eric Krakauer, joined by Inter Miami insider Franco Panizo. Franco, how's it going?
It's going good, except if you're Diego Alonso in Inter Miami right now. Overall good over here on my end. I had a long night last night. Obviously the late kickoff, by the time the game ended and the press conference was done, and I wrote and rewatched the game, it was probably 7:30 this morning. So I'm a bit tired, but it's good to be busy.
You are a consummate professional, and I think that everybody should know that. When I was trying to call you this morning, there was no answer, and it was because you were getting some hard-earned rest. Good on you. I actually had to rewatch the game as well, because I was absolutely exhausted last night, fell asleep after the first 20 minutes of that game, which I don't think should really come as a surprise to anybody considering what those first 20 or so minutes were like. So I just watched the game a few hours ago to make sure that I'm on top of it all, and raring to go. So let's get to it. Okay, before diving headfirst into the game, this was the lineup. It was a 4-2-3-1 formation that Diego Alonso used. Luis Robles in goal. Figal started as a right back. He and Sweat were on either side of Reyes and Torres, who was back from suspension. Ulloa and Trapp were in the double pivot. And then an attacking mid trio of Pellegrini on the left, Pizarro centrally, and Morgan on the right. Carranza was the lone man up top. The goals were scored by Kai Wagner for Philadelphia, a pile driver from outside the box, before Pizarro leveled it up after a pretty nifty counter-attacking move from Inter Miami. And it was a counter-attacking move that killed the game. Chibilko finishing off the play, giving Philadelphia a 2-1 win against Inter Miami. And as I said earlier, or right at the beginning of the pod, things very difficult now for Inter Miami, but there still is a chance against NYC FC. Franco, let's start with the overall performance. What did you think of it?
Let's start with your use of pile driver there. I liked it. This is why they pay you the big bucks at BN Sports.
Don't know about big bucks.
Look, the performance was an improvement over what we saw in the tournament opener against Orlando City, and I think it was maybe their best or second best performance. It's there. The only other one that competes with it is the DC United game up until the red card. Those two games are Inter Miami's best matches to date, even though they lost both of those. But all that said, with the positives came plenty of negatives. A lot of defensive disorganization, poor shape defensively far too often, at least on three notable moments, two of them resulting in goals that stood, one resulting in a goal that did not stand, and it's still not good enough. It's still just not quite good enough. And I know Inter Miami after the match talked about taking the positives from this one and the good moments that they had, and the ability that they were able to demonstrate of dictating the tempo and putting the game on their terms, which are good strides and good progress, but it's just not enough. This team was talked about as being competing for a title in year one, trying to win it by year two, trying to become the most important team in this hemisphere, in the words of co-owner Jorge Mas, and they've come out of the gates very slow. They're 0-4, 4 straight losses to start 2020. It's just not been the ideal scenario and the ideal start that anyone could have envisioned.
I know that Toronto FC lost their first 3 games after they joined the league. I don't know if they lost their first 4. So maybe Inter Miami doesn't have company in that department. And of course, look, this is an unusual season, an unprecedented season given what we've seen. And one thing that you and I talked about was that the blueprint that was starting to be applied, or was was starting to be ingrained in the players' minds was interrupted, and they have to start all over again. So I think we have to look at what has happened always with that as the context. But I agree with you that while there was some improvement, I don't think there was a lot in this game that was necessarily impressive. But let's start with the big moments. And the first big moment of the game is the goal that Philadelphia scores with what's his name again? Kai Wagner. Kai Wagner.
Yeah, you really did fall asleep. I think you fell asleep before the 20th minute, man.
I actually like Kai Wagner, the German, the former Schalke 2 player, Schalke Academy graduate. He struck the ball beautifully. Now, I tweeted that I don't think Robles could have done much about it. He gets his gloves on it, and let me explain why. The ball is kicked out to him, so cleared out into the position. He's at the top of the box on the left-hand side, drills it. There is a forest of players in black jerseys ahead of Robles. In fact, Reyes has to sort of pivot to open that lane. I'm not quite sure why he did it. I guess he didn't want to deflect the ball and perhaps betray Robles. And the ball also takes a nasty bounce just before it gets to the netminder. What did you think of that play?
So it's obviously, to me, and I wrote this on my article for SBIsoccer.com this morning, it's obviously a total defensive breakdown just from the very start of the play, and I'll touch on that really quickly before getting to the obvious pile driver of a shot from Kai Wagner. The play starts with Ben Sweat making the awful decision of deciding to challenge for a ball 3/4 of the way up the field and committing a slide tackle attempt that he misses on, doesn't get any of the ball, and that allows Philadelphia to attack down the left flank, or their right flank, but Inter Miami's left flank. Will Trapp then is covering Brendan Aronson, who gets by him far too easily, turns him way too easily. Will Trapp, in trying to keep him in front of him, allows him the inside lane towards the goal, and Brendan Aronson quickly realizes that and dribbles inward, and then from there he plays the low cross, ball bounces around a little bit. Lewis Morgan comes in late, maybe could have cleared it, but he tries to control it for some reason and he doesn't. Falls to Kai Wagner, he shoots and he scores. Robles gets a piece of it, but he doesn't push it out. I think Robles could have done better. I know that I've talked to other colleagues and they've said there's been at least one or two that have said Robles was screened, but there's a replay of the goal in which you can pretty much see that Robles had a pretty clear sight of the shot with nobody in front of him. Yes, there were bodies in the box, but there was a pretty clear line of sight for him based on one replay. So I can't give him a pass on this one. I think he could have done better, and I think if we probably were able to ask him after game, I think he would say he should keep that out, and that's his number one job, keeping the ball out of the back of the net. So it's not just his fault, because there were a lot of breakdowns that led to that. I mean, again, on the replay, there's like 7 Inter Miami jerseys in the box, and it's just the spacing seemed off, the positioning just seemed off. Obviously, it's last ditch defending at that point, but there were just so many mistakes made that led up to that goal that it's just a tough one to take and a tough way to start the match.
As you were analyzing that, I was looking at the goal over and over, and I'd completely forgotten that Trapp was beaten very easy. It wasn't even really a change of speeds from the young,
a recognition, right? Just a recognition of space,
right? The young phenom from Philadelphia, Aronson, who is a really good player, man. He's got a bright future ahead of him, and I think part of that future may be in Europe. We shall see, unless he does a Landon Donovan. But just looking at that replay, I think it's very harsh to criticize Robles. Although, you know what, Keith Costigan, who's the play-by-play guy at the Sounders, he would agree with you, because when I tweeted that, he responded to me with a big and as if to say, you're wrong, Krakauer.
I paid him $5.
You paid him $5.
I told him via DM, if you argue with Eric, I'll Venmo you $5.
Yeah, well, people are not afraid to argue with me on Twitter. Well, after that, it seemed like Inter Miami had a little bit of trouble getting into the game. It was really sloppy from that goal onwards, and that's when I fell asleep when the game was live, and when I was watching it today, I understood why I fell asleep. But there was a period in time in that first half where you did see Inter Miami grow, and actually, it's quite an effective counterattack, pretty much orchestrated by the player who I think was the best player for Inter Miami, and that is not Wes Morgan, but Lewis Morgan. Wes Morgan. I said actor yesterday, but I was thinking of the Leicester City.
You said that recently on a different pod or before we started a recent pod, and we had a nice conversation about that. But yeah, Lewis Morgan.
Lewis Morgan. I thought he was quite good, particularly on the ball. But he sets up that entire play. It ends up at Pellegrini on the left, who I think was far more impactful than he was in the first game, where he was playing, where he had to drift a little bit centrally, given that they were playing with a 3-man back line and 2 wing backs. And then a little bit of a fortunate take by Pizarro, who I thought in the first half didn't seem, he was getting involved a lot, or he was all over the place looking for the ball, a little bit of freedom, license to roam in that hole. But I don't think he had a particularly good game, but he did well to control that ball, get a little bit through traffic, and then put it away.
So there's a lot to touch on and discuss right there in that package of details. I'll start with Lewis Morgan, who I agree was Inter Miami's best player on the night. He was confident, aggressive, tried to take players on. His set pieces were as dangerous or as accurate as they've been in recent performances. His crosses from the run of play were solid, and he was the key in that goal. If you could split up a goal into percentages, I would give him at least 50, if not 60% of that Inter Miami goal. Not only does he make the penetrating dribbling run that starts in his own half and takes the space that he sees in front of him, then he passes to Pizarro and he follows the pass. He follows the play.
Yeah,
he doesn't.
The pass to Pellegrini, by the way, the pass to Pellegrini is on a dime. It's a perfect pass.
Well, and before that even gets there, it's the fact that some players give the ball to the 10, to the playmaker, and then they'll just assume that player will make things happen. And so maybe they don't make that run, but he makes a curved trailing run behind him, gets it back because Pizarro plays a one-touch ball, and then he plays it out to Pellegrini. Pellegrini feeds Pizarro. Pizarro collects it in the box and is able to slot it home. Lewis Morgan was absolutely the man of the match, even with his maybe error there in the first Philadelphia goal. He still was overall the best player on the night, and you could see his confidence grew as the match went on. And he had that one shot against Andre Blake moments late, early in the second half that could have put Miami up 2-1, but Blake obviously makes a fantastic save to keep it level at that point. You touched on Pellegrini. You said, and I agreed fully with what you said about Lewis Morgan, but I don't agree with what you said about Pellegrini. I think he had a much quieter game this time than he had in the first game. I thought the first game against Orlando City was his best in an Inter Miami jersey to date. I thought this one was more of what we've seen from him in the first 2 games of the regular season, where you can tell he's young and there's starting points there and there's potential, but because of his age, he's likely going to be inconsistent, and I thought he was very inconsistent. Obviously, he gets the assist, picks out Pizarro. That's kudos to him, credit to him, and positive review for him in that regard. But overall, I didn't see much from him. I think maybe there was one other play where he played a good ball in, maybe at the top of the box in the first half. But besides that, I don't think he was that threatening. I don't think he was that active, and I think that's why Diego Alonso eventually pulled him and replaced him with with your boy Jerome Kieswetter, who you've been wanting to see.
Yeah. Took a nice dive, didn't he? During the game, there was also the play, the one that you mentioned just before, with Morgan forced Blake into that save. I thought the ball was going to go wide actually, but makes the save look even more impressive. Maybe it would have hit the post, but Pellegrini sets it up. Do you know what I like about Pellegrini? He looks like a straw of a man. Like he's quite skinny, very nimble on the ball, but he protects the ball. He shields the ball very well. And he's got his first touch when he's being closed down by a defender, I think is one of the things that will ultimately set him apart from other players, because there's no doubt, and I agree with you, inconsistency I think is going to be a part of his game because he's young. But I think this guy is going to develop into a pretty good player. And you look at the new signings for Inter Miami, the new signings. Everybody's a new signing, but you look at the kids. Carranza as well, who shields the ball very well. Looks a lot like a number 9 target man. I thought he would be a little bit different from that. And you see the qualities that would make them, or that made them, very attractive to Diego Alonso or the brass at Inter Miami. Speaking of Carranza, well, actually before that, Chibilko had a goal disallowed, and what was stunning, other than the decision to disallow that goal because he looked to be onside, was just how poorly organized that defensive line was. And I understand that it was a turnover. I get it. But the fact that Aronson had that much space in between lines to turn, to pick his pass, was incredible to me.
Yeah, again, it's another example of just poor defensive shape from the group. And that, at that point, once you see it, it can happen once in a game where you get caught out. But to see it twice and then thrice, a third time later on, which we'll touch on, that to me speaks to the coaching, and that speaks to Diego Alonso maybe not preparing them in the best manner. And of course, after the match, they touch on it being down to lack of concentration and making plays. But I mean, I don't see how players are going to come out and go out and speak out against their coach, especially so early on into a season or a campaign or a project. But I think this one's on Diego Alonso, and just as it is on anybody that was on the field, whether it be it Will Trapp or Ben Sweat, just the defensive shape was poor far too often, and it needed to be better. It needed to be pointed out and corrected much sooner. And yeah, it just wasn't a good look there for on that offside goal. Luckily, it was disallowed, and it didn't go to VAR apparently. So Inter Miami lucked out there.
Yeah, they did. And to your point, a couple things I think that we need to add. Number one, you have Figal, who has been arguably, I would say not arguably, the best center back for Inter Miami. Prone to a couple of mistakes, but a guy who has every attribute to do very well in this team. He's moved to the right back position. He's played there at Independiente. I don't think he was as effective in that position. Certainly not as comfortable marauding up that right channel. You have the fact that you have another partnership in the heart of the defense between Reyes and Torres, and then you add the other ingredient, which is the switch to a back four again. So not a lot of time to prepare. Two different systems. This one perhaps forced because you and I both agreed on the previous pod that they would probably go to a 4-2-3-1. I think most people who watch this team would have figured that out. So we're certainly not geniuses.
There were a couple of graphics
that showed the 3-4-3.
That showed a 3-4-3 with Pizarro at right wing back. I even texted to you that was making the rounds by some people, and you were like, "What? No way!" Yeah. I mean, that's how I read it when you texted to me. I know you didn't put any exclamation points, but
so I stand corrected. We are geniuses.
I mean, we know our stuff when it comes to Inter Miami. I'll just say that.
No, well, of course. If not, we wouldn't have this prestigious pod. But let me just say one other thing. What you see in that play is that Reyes is caught between two decisions. He knows that Sweat has pushed up a little bit too far because it was a turnover. So you have Santos on the wing, essentially hugging the wing, and that's Reyes' guy. You got Chibilko, who is in between him and Torres, and then you have Aronson, who brings the ball down, turns around. Now, I understand that Reyes is a young guy. You actually see him turn his neck and look at Santos, right? Instead of going to Santos, which he can't because he would leave a wide open lane for Aronson, he starts tracking back. What he needed to do in that situation is he needs to attack Aronson, put him on the ground. That's one of those situations where you have to foul a player, take a yellow, or at least just try to close him down. He did neither. That leaves a huge hole, and the pass is terrific, and Chibilko scores a beauty. Anything you want to add there about that?
No. I mean, again, to me, it's just obviously there's a lot of individual mistakes, but they all add up, and it all to me just brings you back to the point that I think Diego Alonso needs to better prepare this team, whether it's tactically or maybe a change of game plan. I'm not exactly sure what he needs to do, but that to me, this game to me, I don't know what you think about it, but to me, this is on Diego Alonso as much as it is any one player.
Oh, yeah, of course. Look, the coach is going to take a lot of responsibility, so are the players. And I don't think overall, individually, the performances by these players was terrible.
I spoke to someone today that's heavily involved in the MLS world, is a former player himself, and his opinion was that this Inter Miami roster is just not very good. If you look at the squad, he thinks it's a mid-table team in Major League Soccer, and if we were speaking about a regular season schedule and standings, and that this the squad is just not that good. So if the squad isn't that good, why are they selling expectations of being such a great team? And that was more along his line of thinking. But if we're gonna go down the path of this team is not that good and these mistakes are being made because the players aren't good enough, then I mean that's another conversation that can be had, I guess, at a later date, because this team was supposed to compete. This team, there's such high expectations on this squad, and so much said about this squad that if this team isn't as talented as they've made it out to be, and as has been touched on by people in the press, ourselves included, then it's gonna set unrealistic expectations for what this team is and what it can be,
right,
and how quickly it can be that.
I have to agree somewhat with that player, and this was something I was going to say in the pod yesterday, but I think it might be a little bit too early to make that assessment that the team is sort of mid-table team and not good enough to compete for the playoffs, and sort of I've felt that way, but I felt that it was too early to make that assessment, and I'm going to continue to say that. However, I will say this. You look at this Philadelphia team that didn't play particularly well, right? But you look at the things that they did well, or the players who did the things that they're supposed to do well, they did. You look at, for example, Martinez, the Venezuelan anchorman in the midfield. He was very good at shutting down space. He was very good at making sure that Inter Miami, for large swaths of the game, didn't have much of a flow, and Bedoya played a part in there too. Attacking down the left wing, Jamiro Montero, whose dummy and assist led to the second goal. I thought every time he was on the ball, he looked confident. He looked like he could do something with it. You look at Aronson, who I mentioned before, looks like a real peach of a player. He's only 19. And then Chibilko, with a couple of opportunities, scores two. One is disallowed incorrectly. So it seems to me that even though Philadelphia didn't play better than Inter Miami, I don't think you can make that argument. But the things that they needed to do in order to win, they did, whereas Inter Miami certainly didn't. But let's talk about let's talk about the goal. Let's talk about the goal that put Philadelphia up 2-1. It's a counterattack. I don't remember exactly, but it seemed to come from an Inter Miami corner.
It was off a free kick. It was off a free kick on the right. It gets cleared and played towards the end line. And the Union cleared that pressure.
Well, there's the dummy. There's a dummy from
right. So they clear it forward to Montero. Montero pulls off the dummy. Will Trapp obviously gets beaten by that, and then it's from there. It's a 3-on-1 against Ben Sweat. And I don't want to harp on it because I think I've made it very clear. And on the beginning of this pod, obviously Aronson still has to make that final pass, and Chibilko turns Ben Sweat with a fake shot and then curls it home
Far too
really
easily.
well.
Far too easily, by the way.
But listen, again, and I don't want to harp on it. I'll reiterate that. But that to me is Diego Alonso. He sent Nico Figal, Andres Reyes, and Roman Torres up into the box to try to get a header on that set piece. That's normal. It's what a lot of coaches do. Send your tallest targets into the box for a dead ball situation. But then you got to organize your team for the scenario that a counterattack comes the other way. And you had to set them up in a good position. And they did not do that. Ben Sweat was the only player really left behind, and he was at the midfield line by himself. He had Will Trapp a little bit further ahead of him, and that was it. And obviously, the Philadelphia pulls off makes some good decisions to get into Miami's half as effectively as they did. But you need more than that. You need, especially when you know that Ben Sweat and Will Trapp are not the most athletic guys, you need at least another player positioned somewhere to help out in that regard. And that's, again, another breakdown defensively, another, again, poor defensive shape. And that is on Diego Alonso a good percentage, and something that I'm sure he's going to look at on the tape and say, I need to correct that, because that's on me as much as it is on the players.
Well, it's interesting that you said that, because the one thing that caught my eye about that play was how many players that pushed up. It was 1-1 at the time. There wasn't a lot of coverage, and of course, it takes a moment of real smarts from Montero to dummy the ball, and that's what beats Will Trapp, because Will Trapp is the guy who's supposed to trap, excuse the pun, Philadelphia in that situation. And actually, just before Philadelphia scored, I think it was at the 63rd minute. The 10 minutes just before that, I thought was the best period that Inter Miami played in that game. And one of the players who I think was crucial to that was actually Will Trapp. Will Trapp is to blame on the first goal. I think it's a little harsh to say he's to blame on the second. But in that 10-minute period, when Inter Miami had the most possession, when they were able to link up play quite effectively, Trapp was excellent at reading the spaces to find those areas where he needed to close down Philadelphia, and he recovered a lot of balls in that period. But of course, everybody's going to point to the 2 goals. I think most players in Trapp's situation are going to be fooled by that dummy. And again, I agree with you. Not very well organized defensively. I was a little impressed with how quickly the Inter Miami players got there. But Ben Sweat turns his back on that drop of the shoulder from Chibilko far too easily. And the shot is well placed. He finishes it really well. But you saw a lot of individual errors in that play. That is 100% sure.
Yeah, and look, I agree with you that Will Trapp had, in terms of passing the ball and moving the ball, he had a fairly solid game. Actually, in my SBIsoccer.com player ratings that I do for every Inter Miami match, I was between a 5 and a 4.5 for Will Trapp, because I thought, in terms of moving the ball and passing, thought he did a good job. He even set up Julian Carranza on one look that should have led to a good chance on goal, but terrible. And we can touch on that really quickly, because we haven't gotten to touch on him and his performance and his first start. But I thought Will Trapp had a solid game in terms of moving the ball and passing the ball, but he was involved in the 2 goals that they surrendered. He was a chief protagonist in both sequences. Whether you can say the dummy's a moment of brilliance. Yes, it's smart, it's effective, and it's unpredictable in that moment. So kudos to Montero, but Will Trapp has to do better, and he's a player that knows that he's not a young player. He's been around. He's played for the U.S. men's national team. He needs to do better. And obviously the defensive game, as we've discussed on last week's pod, is not his strongest suit. He's more of a thinker, of a reader of the game, as opposed to getting stuck into tackles. But he has to do better there. He has to do better. And Ben Sweat does too. Ben Sweat's involved in both goals they give up as well. I thought they were 2 of the worst performers. But I thought the worst performer, and I guess that's a good transition to get to him, and I know you liked him a bit, but I thought the worst performer on the day was Julian Carranza. Obviously, he doesn't give up goals. He's up front, but he wasted 2 great opportunities that he should have had, that he it probably puts at least one of them away if he can get a good first touch on.
Well,
If not both.
Right, one forced a Blake into a save, right?
It wasn't really a save. Blake just came off his line and got to the ball before.
No, not that one. Not that one. The first one, Carranza had a chance. I think it was still in the first half where it's a half chance. He swings his boot at it. He doesn't connect with it.
He smacks it weakly.
Weakly.
But there was two plays in the second half in which he should have had open looks, and one of them was on the Will Trapp ball. I forget how the other one came about at the moment, but he just botched them both, and you just can't have that for your number 9. And again, this is where the mistakes come into play, because it's not all the defensive mistakes. We're not just going to pick on Will Trapp and Ben Sweat. In the attack, you need more from your number 9. You need him to take those clean touches if he's in on goal. And he's young, he's getting used to the physicality of MLS, surely. But that just wasn't good enough from Julian Carranza. And I thought, aside from the poor first touches, I thought overall he didn't show a whole lot from the run of play. I think he has good starting points. I think he'll make good once he gets used to the physicality of Major League Soccer. Probably a step up from maybe in Argentina where the games are a little bit more open. But yeah, I thought he was the worst player in the starting group.
Yeah, and I don't think I can disagree with you. And we haven't talked about Ulloa, and I thought he had some very good moments in the game as well. But for the sake of time, we don't even need to go there. And I agree with you. Carranza did not have a very good game, but he showed at moments, and by moments I mean one or two touches or when he had the ball, of what he is going to be able to do. And let's not forget that he was injured for a very long time. So he hasn't had the preseason that everybody else had. I know that there was a break and everything starts from zero again, but I think that makes a huge difference. He doesn't have what in Portugal you call entrosamento, which is sort of like there's no direct translation, but like an understanding with your teammates yet. And I think that will come. And the fact that he protects the ball well, the fact that he's got a decent pass on him, there are a couple of balls where he opened up the play to Morgan on the right very quickly, which shows that he was already aware of Morgan's positioning. I think he'll come good, just like Pellegrini will. The question is, how long is it going to take for either of those guys to come good, and for Pizarro to really formulate some sort of understanding with all his teammates? Given that he's going to be the orchestrator, and he certainly has that number on his back. Any last thoughts? Oh, and by the way, Roman Torres smacked the header off the crossbar. So really, overall, by judging the play, it should have really ended 2-2. It should have been a draw.
It could have very easily been a draw. Maybe a loss was a bit
harsh.
Harsh. That's the right word I was looking for Inter Miami. And just to round out some thoughts, and to make sure we touch on everything, I do want to touch on really quickly on what you said a little bit ago about Pizarro. I don't think it was his best game either. I think he obviously scores the goal and does that well. Obviously combines well with Lewis Morgan, but I thought some of his decision making, some of his passes were not as good as his usual standard as we've seen in previous matches. So I thought he dropped a little bit in terms of his rendimiento, his performance. I thought Andres Reyes was really good for much of the match. He gets a needless second yellow in the dying seconds of the match. He gets sent off, and he will miss the group stage finale against New York City FC. And I agree with you that Figal was decent at right back. He's played there at Independiente, like you said. I agree he looked uncomfortable, but overall, it's just not enough good performances on the day for Inter Miami.
Yeah, I would agree. And with that, we're going to do a little preview of the game against NYCFC. All right, on Monday morning, 9 a.m., NYCFC is the next opponent, and they, like Inter Miami, have lost their first two games. This last one against a pretty impressive Orlando City. It has to be said, the pressing that we saw against Inter Miami was in full effect against NYCFC, who, at the beginning of the tournament, I think, and you'll probably agree with me, Franco. You and I have covered that team for a very long time together. That
Best
they
ice
were
cream,
one
best press box ice cream.
best press box food.
And
Period.
MLS. Oh no, no, no,
No,
Atlanta.
no,
Actually,
Montreal. Montreal.
I'm not gonna lie. Atlanta. I've only attended one of their games. It was MLS Cup 2018. They have great food, and they have a very modern ice cream dispenser that literally spits out the ice cream in like 2 seconds. It's not one of those slow rollers that we're used to. It was fascinating to see how quick the ice cream came out. But anyway,
But this is good. This is good. This is kind of inside stuff that a lot of people don't know.
that's why I wanted to share it, because it's like, it's a small little detail, but it's it's interesting.
Just to continue on that thought, I've been to the Atlanta United Stadium quite a few times. It's very, very impressive, but I've never been there as a member of the press. So I still have to taste their food. Their what is it they call their spread?
Yeah, well, we'll take a road trip once this virus passes, hopefully, and there's games that people can attend again, and we'll take a quick road trip on a weekend out for a Miami Atlanta game. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So talking about NYCFC, man, they have disappointed. I was going to end my point by saying before that I think they were one of the favorites. They were one of the favorites to win this tournament. Considering the team that they have. Of course, they've got a new coach in Ronnie Dila, but I think that's how you pronounce his last name, Dalia, but really very, very poor.
Yeah, I mean, the first game against Philadelphia Union, they lose 1-0. Probably could have gotten a draw out of that one. This last game against Orlando City, which, man, Orlando City's looking not like the Orlando City we know, but it just hasn't been a good showing for New York City FC overall. They haven't been able to score goals, not only in this competition, but this season in MLS play. So this is carried over since the first 2 weeks of the regular campaign. And this is going to be a do or die match for both of these teams. And obviously, not even winning guarantees you anything, because it depends on how other teams do. And, if you're one of the 4 best third place finishers, whether you advance or not, obviously a draw would doom both teams. So I don't expect them to play very conservatively, especially in the second half. Once the game unravels a little bit, I don't think they're going to come guns blazing from the opening whistle on both sides. But I think once the game gets going, and once the realization that the tournament might be coming to an end, I think both teams are going to open up and take lots of chances, and then we'll see a game that might have a few goals in it. Inter Miami, it's going to be interesting what they do now. Obviously, like we said, Andres Reyes got a red card, was ejected, so he's out. So do you go again with a four-man backline? If you do, and you put Figal back in the middle, or do you
back in?
Do you put Nealis back in? I mean, I wrote about that in my grades piece as well, which is also an analysis piece of the match. There's a conundrum right now at right back. There's been 3 starters in the 4 matches. You had Alves Powell first, Dylan Nealis for the next 2, and now Nico Figal. Clearly, Diego Alonso.
It's a problem.
Right. Clearly, Diego Alonso hasn't liked what he's seen. He's rotated guys. He's looking for a solution. And he hasn't been convinced by anyone. Maybe he liked what he saw from Figal in this last one, but with Reyes out, Figal most likely goes back inside, and then you're gonna have to go with Nealis or Powell. I think Nealis, like you just mentioned, gets the nod. Do you put out Ben Sweat again? Do you go out? Do you throw Ben Sweat back out there after this performance that he had, or do you go with maybe someone like Breck Shea? We haven't seen him in this tournament. We've seen Mikey Ambrose. I would say he's the safer or the more likely pick if there's a change made at that position. But maybe he takes that gamble. Maybe he says, you know what, let's get Breck Shea in there. I've seen what I can get out of the other guys, and I want to see what Breck Shea can do. So maybe there's a chance we see Breck Shea. If not, it'll be between Ben Sweat and Mikey Ambrose. I think the midfield might need to be changed again. And I know Alonso and Inter Miami talked about the positives and that there were good. Diego Alonso was asked about Inter Miami's performance, and the person, the media member that asked the question said something along, it was in Spanish, said something along the lines in translation that I'm translating here is like there was good spells of play, and Alonso, he was calm yesterday. He wasn't angry or overly frustrated. He was pretty calm. In his response, he said, "I disagree with your point or your opinion that it was in spells." He said, "I thought we played good for long moments in the match," which I don't agree with. I don't think Inter Miami played well for long stretches. Did they have possession and put the game on their terms? And yes, but did they combine often and open up Philadelphia's defense for clear-cut opportunities? Not really. Andre Blake wasn't overly tested in this last match. So I think that change needs to happen in the midfield. I don't know if he makes the change. I don't know if he puts in Lee Win, but maybe given Will Trapp's issues, maybe he sees value in making a change. I'm not sure how likely it is, but I think that the rest of the group will probably be the same. You'll see Pizarro, you'll see Lewis Morgan, probably Pellegrini, and then Carranza maybe again up top. Agudelo was an interesting scratch for this one, not because, like we said in the last pod, he didn't play that well against Orlando City, but he wasn't even in the 23 for this game against the Union. So that was a bit curious. We'll see if he makes a return at least into the match day roster. But I think we're going to see more of the same group, slightly maybe one or two changes, and it's just going to come down to if they can improve in the attack and if they can cut out these mistakes at the back.
Yeah, I think so. And given how badly NYCFC defended against Orlando City, I think there are going to be opportunities there. It's curious to see NYCFC play with a three-man back line. Tinnerholm pushing up a lot more, a la Matarrita on the opposite side. There's so many question marks about this game. I said that Inter Miami would score 3 goals in this tournament in the group stage. They've scored 2. Have they scored 2?
Yeah,
they've scored 2. Yeah, they scored 2. So I think they score 1 here. I just think that perhaps NYCFC clicks for this game. The urgency, the understanding between players. I think Keaton Parks probably starts this game, as well as Mitrisa, who came off the bench, didn't add very much, and Tajuri Shradi also came off the bench. But the question is, do you say Castellanos, because Eber is always going to start up top, and Eber is, I think, going to be the key man here.
Yeah.
Because I don't think out of every team that apart from LAFC, but that's a whole different beast because you're talking about a 3-headed monster in the attack that moves very well, and Carlos Vela is not your prototypical forward, right? He's a winger who cuts in, but he's much more than that in MLS. But I think the Eber, the sort of poacher, the guy who's always in the right place, he knows how to find space. I just don't think they faced anybody like that. And considering that we don't have Andres Reyes, it's going to be a new partnership again in the middle. He might do some damage in this game.
I agree with you 100%, Eric. Eber's not a sexy name, not a name that the average fan will know, or that even Inter Miami fans might know. But I think he's going to be the key, and I think his performance is going to make Inter Miami fans realize that much more. I think it's already clear, but I think they're going to realize that much more how much the team needs a number 9. But it's going to be tough, man. I see multiple goals. I usually keep my predictions till day of, but for the sake of the pod, I'm going to say 2-2 draw that knocks both of the teams out.
Oh wow. Yeah, it's going to be a good game. I'm definitely looking forward to watch it. So I think we can pretty much leave it at that. And just a reminder to our listeners. Your
prediction before we wrap things up.
I'm gonna go with 3-1 NYCFC. I think Eber is gonna have a cracking game. And it's more about what's happening in that back line than anything else. And I think that what we need to talk about after that game when we do the pod is what that means for Inter Miami going forward, although MLS is still trying to figure out what the heck is going to happen after this tournament because it's not looking great here in the USA. I'll give you time for one last comment in a second. Franco, I just want to remind everybody, first of all, I want to thank everybody because our numbers have grown exponentially. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for downloading the pod. Please review the pod. Only if it's more than 3 stars. And a reminder that you can follow the pod on various social media platforms. Lots of analysis from Franco Panizo, who, as I said in the opening of this pod, is deeply immersed in Inter Miami life. So he gets to talk to a lot of people on and off the record. So definitely do that. Franco, in 20 seconds or less, final comments.
I'm going to hire you to write my resume. We finally got to see the Rosa Negra jersey, the away jersey, in action in this game against the Union. It wasn't terrible. It was an okay look, I thought. Just didn't have enough pink. A little too focused on the black and not enough pink. I thought there should have been maybe some more pink on the shorts. But we've talked about jerseys on this pod before, so I'll just leave it at that.
And with that, that is a wrap. Hasta la vista, big soccer heads.